Odysseus, telling the tales of his adventures to the Phaeacians, introduces the Cyclopes as follows. We came to the land of the overweening and lawless Cyclopes. Relying on the immortal gods, they neither sow seeds by hand nor plough, but rather everything grows unsown and unploughed for them, wheat, barley, and vines which bring forth wine from their clustered grapes, and the rains sent by Zeus waters them. The Cyclopes do not have meeting places in which to form policies, nor do they have laws, but they live on the crags of high mountains, in hollowed caves, and each Cyclops lords it over his wife and children, and does not get involved in others' business. Soon enough, Odysseus and his men encounter Polyphemus in person, a savage brute who nonetheless harbours a deep attachment to his flocks and lives alone in his cave. Polyphemus proceeds to smash Odysseus's men's brains on the floor before eating them. All this raises the question, who exactly were the Cyclopes and where did they come from? Or perhaps more specifically, who were these Cyclopes and how and why do they differ from other Cyclopes? It seems that there were several different presentations even in Homer's era. This is alluded to by the 5th century BCE writer Hellanicus, who notes that there are 3 types of Cyclopes: the ones who built Mycenae, the ones who hang out with Polyphemus, and the ones who are themselves gods. So in this video, I'll take a look at each of these 3 types of Cyclopes, as presented in the earliest sources, and consider what on earth Polyphemus and his associates are doing in the Odyssey and how they might have got there. Welcome to Ancient Classics. As our new friend Hellanicus noted, there were, you could say, 3 kinds of Cyclopes, and the relationship between them is not immediately clear. The first kind that Hellanicus mentions are those who allegedly constructed Mycenae, and indeed other settlements. The walls of Bronze Age fortresses at Mycenae, and Tiryns for that matter, were constructed hundreds of years before the flowering of written Greek literature, the epics attributed to Homer, and so on. They were constructed prior to the Bronze Age collapse, which also seems to have occasioned the loss of technology of writing, and, it would seem, the loss of construction skills. These pre-Bronze Age collapse settlements, famously, are built from massive, irregularly shaped stones. At some point, people started attributing their construction to the Cyclopes, and the term Cyclopean walls is still in common use today. I don't know when this idea first came about, but it seems to have caught on by the earlier 5th century BCE, if not before, because the late 6th to early 5th century Bacchylides writes, referring to Tiryns, the overweening Cyclopes came and toiled on the beautiful wall for the famous city. Presumably, the archaic-era Greeks, seeing all these old constructions around them made of massive rocks, quite unlike anything their contemporaries were building, attributed their construction, in jest or otherwise, to giants of some kind. Now, there are plenty of giants to choose from, so why did the Cyclopes end up being the ones taking all the credit? Well, perhaps the Cyclopes were granted the honour owing to their reputation as master craftsmen. Which brings us on to another one of Hellanicus's types of Cyclopes, those that are themselves gods. This is usually interpreted to refer to the Cyclopes described in Hesiod's Theogony. And Gaia gave birth to the Cyclopes, those who each bear an OP'd heart, Brontes and Steropes and mighty Soldages. These grant to Zeus the thunder and craft his lightning bolts. But in other respects, they are like the other gods, though a single eye is located in the middle of the forehead. Hence they are called by the name Cyclopes, since each has a single cyclical eye located on his forehead. They also have immense strength and are technically proficient at their jobs. The Hesiodic Cyclopes are distinct from Polyphemus and the Homeric Cyclopes of Book 9 of the Odyssey. Their lineage is different. Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon and the sea nymph Thoosa. The Hesiodic Cyclopes are the children of Gaia and Uranos. Polyphemus claims that he and his fellow Cyclopes are superior to the gods and do not care about them, though even so his claims seem suspiciously like a bluff to me, and Polyphemus is the first to call upon his daddy Poseidon for vengeance. But let's take Polyphemus at his word for now. Conversely, the Hesiodic Cyclopes work for Zeus and owe their freedom to him, according to a later passage in the Theogony. Polyphemus, and it is implied his fellow Cyclopes, live an isolated pastoral life, tending sheep, goats, and making cheese, and they seem to be technologically backwards. They can't even build ships. Conversely, the Hesiodic Cyclopes are master craftsmen. They make thunder and lightning for Zeus. So let's condense the three types of Cyclopes identified by Hellanicus into two. We have the powerful godlike craftsmen, the wall builders, and the Hesiodic lightning smiths on the one hand, and the more monstrous and backward Homeric Cyclopes on the other. And yet, the distinction even between these two classes of Cyclopes, the Hesiodic and the Homeric, become less stark once one differentiates Polyphemus out from his peers. At this point, I'm drawing very much from Mondi's paper from the early 80s. At the risk of oversimplifying Mondi's argument, Polyphemus is a key character, a representative of a certain folkloric type, the giant ogre figure, whose significance we'll discuss presently. Now, Polyphemus happens to be cast as a Cyclops, and we'll discuss perhaps why later. And his fellow Cyclopes are therefore tarred by association. In fact, in general, the Cyclopes as a population are not presented by Homer quite so negatively, save by association or for the sake of plot. For example, they need to be ignorant of seafaring so that Odysseus can make an escape, and so that his other men can safely wait moored at an island nearby. And it is not specified that the other Cyclopes are shepherds, although clearly they do not actively engage in arable farming or viticulture, because the gods take care of that for them. Now, if you strip the Homeric Cyclopes of those features that are necessitated by the plot or thematic concerns of the Odyssey, or which come directly from their association with or proximity to Polyphemus, there's really not that much left to them other than features that are held in common with the Hesiodic Cyclopes, their size, strength, and likely single eye. So you could say that it's almost incidental that Polyphemus is a Cyclops, save in one respect: his single eye facilitates the plot. So perhaps the development of the Cyclopes episode in the Odyssey happened something like this. Point 1. In the folklore and mythology, there were these Cyclopes, closer perhaps to those described in Hesiod, powerful and probably massive beings associated with the powers of thunder and lightning, akin to the gods, titans, and other divine monsters. They were craftsmen, and at some point the servants and technical assistants of Zeus. Point 2. Quite aside from all this, we have the epic tradition, the collective poetic voice that we call Homer. Homer was forging the Odyssey, and in particular Odysseus' mythic adventures as told by Odysseus to the Phaeacians, drawing from the realms of folklore and fantasy, whether inspired by other traditions or drawing upon a primeval wellspring within all humanity. One trope that Homer wanted to adapt for his epic was the theme of the brutish giant who traps but is eventually overcome by the hero through wit and cunning, hence the character of Polyphemus. But Polyphemus needed a context, a background, and it was also a very useful plot device to make him one-eyed. And so it seemed a logical, convenient artistic choice to make Polyphemus a Cyclops. Point 3. Polyphemus, however, also needed to be placed within a society of peers. There are several reasons why, all in service of the plot and themes of the Odyssey. For one thing, it gave Polyphemus's character a sense of context and a mythic realism. Secondly, it afforded the opportunity for the old Utis ruse, whose whole point depends upon there being neighbours for Polyphemus to call upon and then to be ignored by. And finally, there also needed to be a sense of a crude society, albeit a very loosely knit one, around Polyphemus, because this performed a key thematic role. Principally, it's set to contrast with the hyper-civilized society of the Phaeacians, who used to be the Cyclopes' neighbours, and the notion of a crude society is also thematically significant as being one step along the path from Odysseus's isolated wanderings in the mythical world through to his return and reintegration into human society. Now, since Polyphemus was a Cyclops, it follows almost incidentally, and for primarily superficial reasons, that the society around him should also be populated by Cyclopes. Thus, the Cyclopean society that we see in Odyssey Book 9 is almost accidentally Cyclopean and purely by dint of association with Polyphemus, who really is just a Cyclops because of his single eye and because he needed to be someone. Indeed, you could say this is signalled by Hellanicus' description of these guys solely by reference to their association with Polyphemus. Recall that the class of Cyclopes that Hellanicus identifies are described as hoiperi ton Polyphemon, those ones around Polyphemus. Now, I don't think society ever really forgot the distinction between the Hesiodic Cyclopes and the Homeric Cyclopes around Polyphemus, at least not until modern times. Because if I scan my memory of Cyclopes from the Greco-Roman tradition, most times there is a savage or unsophisticated Cyclops. It's usually actually Polyphemus himself. But whenever we see the Cyclopes as master craftsman, or an extension of that, builders, then Polyphemus is not named. I haven't carried out a full review of the literature, so let us know in the comments if you can think of any examples of Polyphemus as master craftsman, or of a savage and brutish Cyclops that is not Polyphemus. That said, I've not checked him out at all, but I think the late antique mega-epicist Nonnus might have some exceptions, although I'm scared of Nonnus, so I've not actually read him. Maybe I should. Now, we've not tackled the question of the single eye of the Cyclopes, and I guess a video ostensibly discussing the origins of the Cyclopes would be incomplete without tackling that question. There's a whole debate about whether the Cyclopes have one eye or three, i.e. two normal ones and one big one in their forehead, or even sometimes they seem to be presented as having two eyes, though I think that's largely a matter of perspective, or variations, whereas Cyclops is presented as having two regular eyes, one of which has been lost. Though I think that's usually in kind of realist adaptations inspired by the Cyclopes theme. For example, in the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which I confess to not having seen, or in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, in the early game. Although, if I recall correctly, in the later game, there is actually a more conventional monster Cyclops. But I think we can cut through all those variations and say that, broadly, the single central eye, whether supplemented or not by others, is a key feature of the Cyclopes in pretty much all variations. A key feature, at least, but perhaps not the defining or etymological feature. Now, Hesiod purports to etymologize the single eye. He says that the Cyclopes are named thus from their circular or wheel-like kyklos, eye, ops. Though, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think face is the primary or original meaning of ops rather than eye. Round face feels more real or natural than round eye. And personally, I think the eye's singularity is more comment-worthy than its roundness. So anyway, the Cyclops etymology as wheel or circle eye feels like a retrospective explanation to me. But hey, who am I to argue with Hesiod? Also pointless or misguided, in my view, are the multiple attempts to explain some literal or mystical explanation for the single eye. Agwe, apologies for mangling her name, and Buxton are good here, cataloguing and generally dismissing most popular theories, including elephant skeletons whose trunk cavity might have been mistaken for a one-eyed monster, body horror inspired by congenital deformities and so on, or some dumb theory about blacksmiths wearing eye patches to protect one eye from sparks, or after being blinded in one eye by flying lumps of molten metal, hence the one-eye craftsman origins. That, I think, can be primarily attributed to Robert Graves, and we all know that Graves can get a little bit fanciful about these kind of things. Another theory that I really don't hold to is that the one eye is representative of a volcano crater, and there are a whole load of even more woo-woo mystical ideas which I really cannot even be bothered to name. Personally, I don't have truck with any of these theories. I just think, yeah, one big eye. It's really good character design. It's distinctive, monstrous, and memorable. So why the hell not? Plus, as in Book 9 of the Odyssey, it opens up plenty of convenient plot devices. Though in discussing the single eye, I've left one more important discussion hanging, namely the monstrous ogre trope and what it's doing in Odyssey Book 9. To recap, I said that maybe Polyphemus is an embodiment of the big ogre antagonist who traps the hero who, physically outpowered by the brute, outwits and escapes him. This is Polyphemus's main narratological function within the Odyssey. Him and his pals being Cyclopes was almost an afterthought to give context. So, if that's the case, then what is this ogre trope all about, and where did it come from? There have been several folkloric or mythological studies identifying parallel passages from world folk literature. I think actually one of the Brothers Grimm was one of the key early proponents here. And there are apparently loads of similar tales bearing the same key beats across European folklore and further afield. I'm in two minds here. Some might claim that random peasant folklores in some Eastern European village in the 19th century could not have been aware of Homer, and so their similar tales must have been an expression of an originating primeval human or at least Proto-Indo-European myth. Well, I don't necessarily buy that, because I don't necessarily think it's too bizarre that some aspects of the Odyssey might have, albeit very indirectly, found their ways into all kinds of folklore in the post-medieval world. And moreover, I think societies will likely independently come up with tales of massive monsters trapping heroes, and it stands to reason that a hero cannot just beat up a massive monster, he must escape using his wits. It's just logical consequence. So really, I could take all of this with a shrug and say, yeah, big scary monster, outwitted by Odysseus, kinda could have come from anywhere, and that's okay. But perhaps I'm being a little bit too dismissive here about the deeper origins of the Polyphemus tale. So I'm going to end up by turning to a real heavy hitter, Walter Burkert, whose analysis of the Polyphemus episode takes structuralist cliches to the next level. Burkert and his structuralist predecessors hint at the primeval, essential elements of the Polyphemus episode. And I'm going to cite Burkert at length. One can notice a nucleus of cannibalism overcome by blinding within a frame of trap and escape, all in a larger frame of the successful quest. This is nearly pure folktale, perfectly crystallized in Homer's text. There are two reversals, from superiority to desperate inferiority, and from inferiority to triumphant superiority. This final superiority displays itself in 4 codes. Man with weapon against unarmed savage, the sober against the drunkard, the seeing against the blind, the master of language against the stupid. Thus the myth contains the triumph of cleverness against brute force, set in the elementary experience of trap and escape. But there is more to it. We find the combat myth entailed in the quest for food. Man eats animals and consumes them, disturbing the balance of life. To make up for this, myth introduces an agent who preserves the flocks and eats men. the ogre, master of animals, is a term necessitated by structural logic, not a childlike fantasy. But there is a remarkable historical clue. The weapon manufactured by Odysseus, the spear hardened by fire, which is in fact superfluous. Odysseus has his sword. The wooden spear hardened by fire is the primordial weapon of man. It is a simple truth that the invention of this weapon, which presupposes the use of fire, has enabled man to become the most destructive of carnivores himself. Rescued from a dead end by the use of violent technology more than once, man has triumphantly survived but remains endangered by the curse of violated nature. The antithesis of nature and culture is more than a logical game. It may be fatal. I've cited Burkert at length because I reckon that if you've made it this far into the video, you're the kind of person who might enjoy it. But also, the deep mythic structuralism of Burkert's take has next to nothing to do with the Cyclopean nature of Polyphemus himself. And this, in turn, strengthens the core case that I was arguing earlier, that Polyphemus' identification as a Cyclops, and by extension, the Cyclopean nature of his associates, is almost an afterthought. So, who are the Cyclopes? Well, they're cool, mythic dudes, each with a single eye in the middle of their forehead. Some are pretty much gods, and craft cool shit for the gods. Some, perhaps the same, build a load of fancy walls. And then there's Polyphemus, who's a monstrous brute, and his fellow Cyclopes just get dragged down reputationally with him, which is pretty much what Hellanicus said in the 5th century BCE. If you've got any deeper insights, let us know in the comments. As usual, I put all my sources, primary and secondary alike, in the video description, but aside from Homer, Hesiod and Hellanicus, this video most heavily draws from Mondi's 1983 paper and Aguirre and Buxton's 2020 book Cyclops, The Myth and Its Cultural History, both of which are excellent and accessible reads, and of course, Walter Burkert. Annoyingly, most of these sources are in Wikipedia anyway, which I look at last of all as a sweeper. It's annoying when that happens, right? Next time? I don't know. I've got tickets to go see Nolan's Odyssey soon. I'm very interested to see how he will handle the end of the Odyssey, which to me is the weirdest part. So maybe I'll have something to say about that. Till next time, like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon.